Andres Segovia Show.
Welcome to the program, everyone. I am Andres, and this is the longest episode I've ever done, so I ask you to bear with me if you're not a fan of long-form episodes. There was just no other way to approach this one. I have trimmed considerably my take on addressing the housing affordability crisis and what we can do to fix it. So this is the condensed version, if you will, because there's just so much more to talk about, so much more to elaborate on, and so much more context to give. What makes this a difficult topic to even address is the fact that there's a lot of emotion involved, as you'll hear in what I have previously recorded. So if you have the time and attention, by all means, please listen to everything. Some of you will not agree. Some of you will agree. Some of you will be enlightened by what I have to say. And that is the point, to be able to be a bridge to both sides or all sides to the issue, to come together, to come up with real solutions, and to truly see that current implementations of different things that are trying to address the problem are only making it worse. So that's my hope and intent. So here is my take on the housing affordability crisis.
I will now tackle the housing affordability crisis in this episode. I have addressed this crisis in some form or another and devoted certain episodes to the aspects that address this particular issue previously, so I will be name dropping some of those episodes and referencing them. So I do recommend that you check out those episodes to get more in depth into this issue, if that is something that you want to do. Because one of the problems in trying to address this issue is that people have already made up their minds. There is this ideology that both sides of this coin, of this issue, have of the other side, and both ideas are actually the very same thing. For example, because this is seen as a class warfare issue, which is unfortunate, we have the tenants pitted against the landlords, and therefore vice versa, the landlords pitted against the tenants. Not to say that that is true, but the fact that people believe that is the way it is, that's why the battle lines have been drawn, and the tenant activists have been trying to get the at least the local governments or even the state government on their side to pass legislation against landlords. So that's the problem that we have in trying to come to an agreement between both sides to be able to sit down with one another and actually have conversations, because both sides have already made up their minds. Tenants believe the landlords are greedy buttholes that are trying to price them out of their own units just to line up their pockets. And on the other side, landlords believe tenants to always not care to pay their rent on time, that are a public nuisance to their properties, and are an overall nightmare to deal with, which is unfortunate because both sides have the same symptoms, that they are prejudging the other side willy-nilly. And sometimes it happens because certain individuals do give bad names to each side. For every greedy landlord, there's also a very bad tenant. There are those tenants that don't care about the property, that are always messing things up for the neighboring people in the units. And because of the irresponsibility of one tenant, the landlord has to clamp down on everybody else through stricter leasing agreements and also increased rent. So the other side is that when the landlords get too greedy, you have the tenants that are victimized by this having to go to the legislation and enforce different rules that affect the landlords, be it through rent control or other legislations. So that is the issue that we face here, in that if we can't bring both sides together to have a conversation, we will not come up with a constructive solution. So if you find yourself anywhere on these camps, or even somehow in between, then by all means, I hope you hear me out, because I am basically from both sides. I will quickly give you my background as to how I got to where I got, because I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I have been a broker for at least 6 years. Before that, I've been involved with the family construction business. Family construction business that consists of about 25 people. So I'm not talking about some massive construction company. I'm talking about 25 people on average, depending on the season. I was born into that company. It's a company that my father started, blood, sweat, and tears. We started off so poor. My parents, their first bed together was a mattress they found on the side of an alleyway, abandoned because it supposedly was of no use anymore. They took it home, they dusted it off, they cleaned it up, and that became their bed. They set it on top of 4 cinder blocks. When I came along, I did not grow up on a crib. I was put in a plastic baby bathtub and a blanket on it, and that was my bed. And we lived in a very dangerous second-story apartment that had absolutely no guard railing whatsoever. And my parents said that there's been numerous close calls where I could have fallen off the balcony because there was nothing to protect me from falling. And in one extreme case, my father caught me literally as I was going over the ledge. So many near-death experiences. And my father knew that we couldn't stay in apartments forever. And especially having the worry that every single year when the lease came up, it was that fear, will we be able to still be here, or will we be put out onto the streets and having to look for somewhere else to be in? So that was a very real thing, and it happened for most of my youth. And eventually, my father was able to acquire property when he was able to make enough to buy his first property. And it was an investment property. And it was an investment property he bought in what now is known as the Wilmington, California area. This is before the 105 freeway was even erected there. The Rodney King riots, I was in the midst of all the chaos. I was in the middle of all that. This is where my father bought his first property. And the property that he bought, because we had nowhere else to be in, was a dilapidated house that required a lot of repair. And because we had nowhere else to go, we moved in just like that. And every morning, my mom would get up and having to do some maintenance work in the house to make sure that it was okay for me to be able to walk around. And by then, I was accompanied by my baby brother too. So that's the conditions that we grew up in. And fast forward to today, after everything that my parents been able to sacrifice, now their grandchildren are being raised in a much better environment than I was raised, just like any parent would want for their kids. And on top of that, my parents were also able to take their family out of poverty outside the country, not just here in the United States. So that is one of the principles as to why I tell and inform people that your financial planning for your future, your path to wealth, is through real estate, because it's a tried, proven, and true system that is able to get you out of that poverty. And so that's where I come from. So I was a tenant that became a homeowner and also a landlord. I have properties that I rent out. My father has his properties that he rents out. So I understand the landlord-tenant relations. And one of the principles that I learned from my father the most was the ability to have a relationship with said tenants. Because just like the golden principle is in business, because this is a business, let's not kid ourselves, it is a business. 80% of your business comes from 20% of your clients. So what does that tell you? Retention, customer service, customer satisfaction. If you're a landlord, you signed and understood you as soon as you acquired property and started putting people in there, because you started establishing a business with an expectation of customer service. It's a two-way street, not just one. You have a customer who needs to pay you dues, but you also have to satisfy. That is the way the business is structured. So with all that prefaced, I hope we can have a conversation, because this topic is so emotionally and politically charged, which is why people have biases and sometimes even separate themselves along political party lines, for which no one is able to have a conversation. Instead, they sling mud at one another, which is unfortunate. So hopefully we can look past our biases, check our perspectives of the others at the door, and let us come to the table and have this conversation about the housing affordability crisis. So first off and foremost, let's answer the question: what is the housing affordability crisis? The housing affordability crisis, as we know it today, and I'm going to stick to California and mostly the local regions that I service, Los Angeles, because it's a great example. The issues that are faced here is that people are getting priced out of their homes, basically, that they cannot afford the rent, and if they try to look somewhere else, they're not going to find somewhere comparable or even lesser to that extent, because everything has gone up. Everything's become expensive. That's why some people are looking out of the state to move out. Meanwhile, you have people that can't find other places ending up on the street. And the other issue that is part of the housing affordability crisis is that houses themselves that are available for purchase are too expensive for some individuals to be able to purchase. And we also have a shortage of said housing to be able to purchase. And because of that, the prices of the commodities, this being the houses for sale, continue to rise in prices. So while interest rates remain low, more people are qualifying to be able to buy and are motivated to buy because of a lack of affordable housing. And in some cases, the rents being so high, it's basically a mortgage. Might as well try to get a mortgage. That when they try, they're sometimes not able to buy, because they either get outbid or they just can't find a house in the areas they were looking to buy, and they don't want to look 2 or 3 hour drive out of the city to be able to find something they can't afford and then commute like that every single day to work in Los Angeles, for example. So how do we get here? Oh, I already see some hands coming up. No, it isn't because of greedy landlords. It's like, what? No, it is because of greedy landlords. Look, that's what I was just saying. That if you have a mindset in place, I ask that you leave it at the door and listen to this part of the argument. I've already touched upon the myth that the housing affordability crisis is the cause of greedy landlords in the episode of that same name. So I point to that episode for you to understand the entire logistics as to what propelled the housing affordability crisis. In a nutshell, it's this. And it comes down to simple economics. And I don't want to condescend to anybody, but I want to also explain what that simple economics principle means. Because there's some people that hear this term but don't grasp it or understand it. So I'll describe it like this. Because some people say the spike in rent increases is akin to price gouging. That's what they're saying. The rent's too damn high. It's price gouging. This is the example I'm going to give you. My economics professor gave the best example because there was something that he experienced himself when he was in this African village. He went to this African village a couple of decades ago or more. And when he was there was a farmer's market that was put up, and he was going down the aisle of the granaries. So there was a bunch of different people that were selling grains at different prices. Some more competitive than others. Meanwhile, there was this one guy that had it at top dollar. Everybody was shopping at all the competitively lower priced grains. But no one was coming to this guy's tent to be able to buy the top dollar grain. So my professor goes up to the individual and offers to buy some of the grain, but then tries to negotiate the price down. The farmer says, no, I'm not going to cut my price down. And he's like, but everybody else is cutting their price down. Look, everybody's shopping over there. But this man insisted he was not going to lower his price. So my professor leaves. And my professor, being the ever-curious economist, he kept thinking about this. So later in the day, he comes back, and it just so happens that the grains have all been sold out. So when he's coming by, he sees that everybody's sold out, including the man that had it at top dollar. So he comes over to him and asks, oh, so you finally lowered the price on your grain, I see, because it all sold out. And then the villager says, no, I didn't lower my price. This is a metaphor for the rental prices. Because they're price gouging. We need houses. Well, that almost sounds like they're comparing it to when there's a wildfire and then the commodities that are available in a natural hazard-stricken region, everything goes up. There are certain things that happen that's called price gouging. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen. It happens. But why does it happen? Because now you have people rushing to buy that need this, and then the one selling it has to make a choice. Sell it to whoever needs it most, or sell it to the greediest person coming to buy. What do you mean, Andres? What do you mean the greediest person coming to buy? Let's say you're in a natural hazard-stricken region. Water is a commodity that you absolutely need. There are 10 cases of water, and there's 10 people that need it. This one person comes over and sees, holy smokes, 10 cases of water are left, and they're on special. I'm going to buy them all. And this person buys all the water, takes it with them. The 9 others arrive to the convenience store. There's no water left. Everyone suffers. Now let's take it to the next level. The prices are not on special. They're at regular price. The individual comes like, oh, well, they're not as cheap as they were yesterday, but I'll still take a few. Let's say he takes 5. 5 cases of water are gone. 5 remain. 9 show up. Like, not everybody's going to get water. Now let's take it to the most extreme step. These water bottles have doubled in price per case. Then the individual showing up says, oh, these have doubled. I'm not going to spend all my money on all these water bottle cases. I'll probably just take 1, maybe 2. But, I'll just take the 1. A disincentive, a deterrent for someone coming over to take up everything. Because now this individual buys just the 1 case of water bottles, 9 more show up, there's 9 available. Let the market decide. That's why I'm in favor of the market deciding the price instead of the government getting involved. It's like, Andres, capitalism is the problem. That, see, now we have the political part coming into it, that people have a stigma against capitalism. Check the privilege and the ideologies at the door. We're going to talk about that in a moment, about what the free market can do to correct this housing crisis, because the government have not been able to fix it, and it's not anything new. And we have many examples that we can point to. Again, something that I will get to in a moment. Okay, so what else has propelled them, this increase in prices in housing? The problem stems from the fact that we don't have enough supply. I mentioned that before. So here comes the principles of economics. I've given you two examples, the granaries and then what happens when a fire has a region, because it applies to this position. The position is that we are in a crisis. So the crisis being that we need more housing. And now we have landlords that are charging more, because now there's a bunch of people that need housing, and now you're deterring some people from getting a bunch of rentals. Say, I'm going to get this rental, my buddy's going to get the other one, we're going to be neighbors. Instead, it's like, you know what? Too expensive. I'm going to get the rental. Buddy, you want to join up with me in this one so we can both split the rent? Now, have you heard about that? Have you heard about that? Yes, I'm sure you have. You have families that are gathering together, thereby not taking up other inventory. But that still doesn't solve the problem. The problem is that we have such minimal housing and a high population. And that's even considering that in California, we have a migration issue where people are leaving for multiple reasons from the state. The two largest reasons people are leaving the state: one, they're being taxed out of here. And number two, they're being priced out of here. Let's throw in a third reason. Third, they're being politically kicked out because the party of tolerance is saying that they don't tolerate the other party. So they're kicking them out. At least that's the way they come across. Those are the top three reasons why people are leaving the state. So when you have factors that are kicking people out of the state, there technically should be more housing available. And yet we're still running into the issue of not enough being available. We have a scarcity. Say, Andres, that doesn't make any sense. I see a bunch of high-rises everywhere. Yes, you're right. You're seeing luxury apartments go up. Luxury apartments. How does that alleviate the low-income housing? Low-income housing is what some people desperately need. And what's transpired is that when the houses that are available for purchase, there's not enough to go around, then those that can't buy have to rent. And as they're renting, they've taken up units they otherwise wouldn't have, because they would rather enjoy their own home. But they can't have a home because they either were outbidded, they can't find a place in their area that's affordable to them, or quite literally nothing is available, which tends to be the case. Why? Because we have properties that have been, that the turnover, these houses are either anywhere from 50 to 100 years old. And that's not saying something bad about the house per se, but with today's standards of requirements for electricity and water efficiency, some of the older stuff really needs to be brought up, which requires a bigger investment to do in the first place. So you're hoping the previous homeowner has already addressed that. And when they don't, it's probably on you. My goodness, you have to rewire the entire house. That means rip out all the wire from the walls. What about the plumbing? Now, if the house is not on a high-rise foundation, if it's on a slab, you got to break the concrete to get in there just to replace the pipes. So these are things that have to be done because new housing isn't being built. And let's not confuse the issue. I'm not talking about these buildings being built up with luxury condos and apartments. I am talking about houses, and I don't even necessarily mean like single family homes. It could be a duplex, it could be a triplex, it could even be a townhouse. I'm talking about houses that are considered homes for people that have an area that they can call their own, like maybe a little private backyard, if that, or they're part of a community or something. We are lacking that. Meanwhile, we have a bunch of units being built in heavily population dense, like downtowns or metropolitan areas akin to downtown, suburban areas that are not too far removed from the city, because they're trying to encourage mass transport. So if all that's happening, how is it that we still have rising rent rates that are crazy, and also a scarcity in housing? It's for that very thing, that they're not necessarily building the houses that can contribute a relief to the housing affordability. Meanwhile, when you have a population of 40 million people in California and very little inventory to go around? That is the principle of economics. When you have low supply and high demand, naturally the price of that commodity goes up. So when you introduce more supply to satisfy a demand, prices start coming down. And when you have a supply that exceeds the demand, the prices go way down. And I'll get to that solution in a bit, even though I've already addressed it in a previous episode. But Andres, this does not address why my landlord has suddenly doubled my rent. I've been a long-term tenant, and out of the blue, I get a 60-day notice saying that my rent is almost going to double in 2 months. That's ridiculous. How did this happen? My landlord is being greedy. That is the predominant ideology. So now I want to address it, because what the government has taken action to address and alleviate the issue is the very thing that has led to the random jumps in rent increases. The issue is twofold. One part is the landlord that was not managing the property correctly because they didn't realize they had depressed rental rates. What does that mean? That if that landlord followed the trends, he wouldn't understand that that unit was probably hundreds of dollars more per rent per month as the market says it should be. But because they rented it out to someone and it's been a long-term tenant and just done incremental rent increases over the years, they never paid attention to that, and it didn't really matter to them because I guess because they raised the rent by so little every year, they didn't mind so much until the government kept threatening to issue or to introduce statewide rent control. Two things happened in the past 2 years. In 2018, there was a scare. The scare being in the form of Proposition 10. Proposition 10 was going to introduce a statewide rent cap, so it was going to limit how much homeowners could increase the rent. And when landlords got wind of this, they found out, holy smokes, what am I renting for right now? Because what they're going to impose is really going to hamper my ability to raise the rent. But why do they raise rent? Hold your questions. I will address it. So when that happens, even though it hasn't happened yet, the landlords are quickly reacting to the threat and say, we're going to raise our rents now then, because when the law kicks in, should it pass, we will be at the ready. Then everybody started getting these notices that have depressed rental rates. They were getting rental notices that brings them up to market. And the market, as we already mentioned, had expensive rental rates. So now as a parent, like, what the? I'm not going to pay this. This is price gouging. I'm not going to pay for this. Well, guess what? If you didn't and you withheld your rent, the landlord could have evicted you, because then they would put a tenant that was going to pay that. That was the issue, and some tenants realized that, which is why they were demanding rent stabilization ordinance be introduced, or what's also known as rent control. The mere threat of it woke up landlords to react. Proposition 10 failed because the populace voted no. And even though the proposition was supported by the unions, it lost support towards the end because the very people that were supporting and pushing the rule, they didn't read the full detail. The detail said government takeover of basically all private property. What that meant was that the government could come to your home, your own home, even if you're not renting anything out. It's your own home that the government can show up willy-nilly, no warrant whatsoever, and just walk in and say, I need to check your house because I want to see and make sure that you're living according to our standards. That was the threat, which ultimately why Proposition 10 failed. And as I kept saying, that these rent control initiatives are just that, government takeover of properties, for why it's not a solution and also very, very dangerous because you're having your rights being taken away by the government. Every time I ask anybody about the government, what do you think about the government? The first thing they say is they're crooked, they're corrupt, they're money grabbers, they run away with our taxes. So, in other words, you don't trust the government. No, of course not. So why do you want the government involved in everything? To which they're like, well, because they see that's the only solution to address the issue that they have in the so-called class warfare against landlords. So the mere threat of rent control is what spiked it up. But the problem didn't go away because, first off, this isn't anything new. So in 2019, the state said, you know what, the people made a mistake. We do need statewide rent control because this problem of housing affordability isn't going away. So instead of actually rezoning the areas to be able to build more on existing land and opening up some federal land for actual private building, we're going to institute a statewide rent cap. And that was in the form of Assembly Bill 1482, which was ratified in October, signed by the governor. Before it was even signed into law, landlords took action. And I said, if this law is signed by the governor, the holidays are ruined. Goodbye Thanksgiving, goodbye Christmas. You have an increase of homelessness because people will be put on the street because the government forced landlords into doing so. And that's exactly what happened to the dot. As soon as the governor was done signing, it got so bad that the Los Angeles City Council issued a moratorium saying that they will not honor the legal evictions the landlords were doing because it became en masse. That's exactly what I said would happen. So rent control isn't the answer? No, I've said it before. So that's why I'm going to point to the episodes where I've addressed what rent control is, because rent control isn't exactly a rent cap that limits how much you raise in rent. Rent control, by the examples that we had for decades, I can point you to Los Angeles, San Francisco, Santa Monica, and now we have new ordinances instituted for Burbank, Glendale, Long Beach, and Santa Ana is one of those that are trying to get it passed. That's just speaking locally here, except for San Francisco, they're further up. The problem with rent control has been this, that it leads to gentrification. So that means the poor get pushed out and the affluent get pushed in. So if the intent of rent control is to help the poor, why do they end up in the street? Well, because of the greedy landlords. No, because rent control says that the only way you can charge a market rent is if you actually repair the dilapidated building. But the only way to repair a dilapidated building is to relocate a tenant. In other words, get them out of the house. So the very law is telling the landlord, kick them out, demolish the badness, build up the new, and you can rent as you should. Well, okay then. Because you forced my hand. I don't make money off a dilapidated building in the first place. I have bad tenants that refuse to pay me rent because they say I have to fix something, but I don't have the cash to fix it because you won't let me recover the investment. What do you mean recover the investment? Again, something that I'll get to in a moment. So the very rent control that's set out to decrease homelessness, that keeps rent in check, had the opposite effect. The worst cases of homelessness that has become an epidemic that's also known nationwide are in Los Angeles and San Francisco. In 2019, there was an outbreak of hepatitis that happened from Los Angeles to San Diego. There was even in San Francisco had to start what is called a poop patrol because they were picking up at least 28,000 human excrement every single month. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a crisis in our hands. But this is rent control. They've been around for decades, and they're the strictest form of rent control that exists. And if you want to know the nitty-gritty of it all, I point to you what rent control, how it is, how it's supposed to be managed, and why it's damn near impossible to comply with everything they're saying. Now, I don't have that much of an issue dealing with rent control because I was born and raised into it in a sense. Even my father, who were problem solvers. And we've been able to understand the ins and outs more or less because they keep changing some of the regulations, but we try to keep up to date as much as we can. So we learn to conform and deal on those parameters. But still, it's difficult. Never easy. I never said it was easy. So that has been the problem, that rent control isn't the answer, hasn't been the answer. And I continued pointing to this encouraging or not encouraging rent control because the very thing that you're hoping will be your savior will probably be your undoing. Oh, Andres, you're just fear-mongering. Landlords just don't care about the financial well-being of tenants. I appreciate those of you that have contributed to this conversation through Facebook, through some of the socials, and even YouTube. Those of you that have done it, you know who you are. So thank you very much for the contributions. And this is actually something I lifted from one of the YouTube comments because it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement to explain how landlords care for the financial well-being of their tenants. which in of it itself sound like a loaded statement to me to mean that landlords just don't give a damn. Again, this is because the ideology that permeates people on both sides of the camp is that they just vilify the other side and believe both sides to be irresponsible, and in the case of landlords, they're just greedy, and in the case of the tenants, they're just irresponsible and don't care. So let's get to the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about the responsibilities of what a tenant-landlord relationship is. And let's start with a simpler one, the tenant side of things. You as a tenant, whether you're a new tenant or a long-term tenant, your responsibility is to pay your dues on said day that you agreed to pay, and also take care of the property and report to the landlord per the agreement when you intend to do certain things or there are changes that need to be made with you. Now, for long-term tenants that have called their apartment home, don't fall into the trap because of an emotional connection that makes you believe you own the place. You don't. You are there with the permission of the landlord. And I will prove as to why you have almost zero stake in the property when I get to the landlord side of things. So you are there through the permission and prerogative of the landlord. And you can be out by either your choice in terminating your tenancy, or through a notice to the landlord that your time is up, not a renewal of a lease, etc., 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 or whatever, and then you're gone. That is the true fact about the responsibility and the effect of what a tenancy can lead to. So, what about the landlord side? Because the landlord just wants money. They're pocketing the money. That's why they raise the rent every single year. To understand what it means to be a landlord is to be a property owner yourself. To be a property owner yourself, unless you have the cash, that means you leverage something. That means you went to the bank and got a loan, which is what most landlords do. And when you have senior landlords that have invested their life savings into acquiring a property, they're probably still paying some things off, and they're on their fixed income. The fixed income being whatever they collect from the rental income. So this is something that they depend on as a livelihood. So when the question or the statement is made, how do landlords even care about the financial well-being of the tenants? The question also is, do the tenants care about the financial well-being of the landlords? Because it is in everyone's interest that both sides understand that they both need to be working together in this case. A tenant needs to uphold the responsibilities just like the landlords do. Landlords, remember, you created the business when you started renting things out. Therefore, satisfaction is expected. That comes with any territory when you're starting a business. And because it's a business, there's expenses aligned with that. Inflation goes up every year. So when you have the present value dollar issue, and you also have inflation, that means the dollar today is not worth the same as the dollar yesterday. So the reason the rent goes up every single year is not because the landlord's lining his pockets. Not saying that all of them don't. Some of them I'm sure they do, because I ran into them. They don't pay their mortgage, and they're taking the rent from the tenant because they believe this is my money. It's like not when you have financial responsibilities that are tied to that property. No, it's not. It's like, wait, what are you talking about, Andres? Exactly. The issue gets a lot more muddled and complicated because the landlord has to pay his creditors back for this investment. What does an investment mean? You're putting money in the hopes of getting money back, or expected rate of return at some point. But you're putting money in now, a vast amount, and you're only getting them back in trickles that you're hoping will be collected over an extended period of time. And in the meanwhile, you have a ton of expenses that are associated with that, because as the owner, as the one that holds the money, the true owner of the property, they set down requirements for the landlord to comply with, such as maintaining multiple different insurances. At the acquisition of the property, title insurance is required. Title insurance is something that happens during a transaction. They have to maintain a bunch of other things to make sure they're satisfying the bank. Let's just call them the bank, okay? So the bank is holding the money, and they require the landlord to maintain all these different things. And those things could be they have to be homeowners insurance, fire insurance, flood insurance if they're in a flood area, earthquake insurance if they're in an earthquake prone area, especially California. That means you have to. And if you're in a wildfire danger area, you have to have wildfire insurance. And they have severe weather. Now you have to account for possible hurricane or tornado insurance. So that's insurance on top of insurance on top of insurance. And insurances go up every single year. So the landlord has to pay all that. What else does the landlord have to pay? Landlord has to pay the taxes on the property, because there's property taxes that are due annually for these things. The maintenance on the properties. all the overhead that goes into it, because there's property manager, now he's paying somebody to take care of the property. Anything associated to maintaining their property manager through other insurances, because you never know. If he has a big enough stake of a business, he probably has employees that probably require workman's compensation insurance, which is super expensive. So you have all these different things that are at play here just to property manage. And if the property is in a rental stabilization zone like Los Angeles, now there's multiple things at play here. A business registration fee to the city of Los Angeles, a city local tax that needs to be paid, a fee paid to the housing department because of the inspections that are mandated by the city that need to be done, but the landlord has to pay for it. So when there's all these expenses that are tied into managing and owning property in said regions, what you see as what the landlord only sees an increment increase, and as a tenant seeing that they're trying to profit off me, you don't see where the money's actually going, or let me rephrase, where it should be going, because you have all of this investment that the landlord has to pay back. Because the last thing I didn't tell you is that they still have to pay back their mortgage and interest on that property. And the investment premiums for properties, then when they come from venture capitalists or what are called hard money loans, they're around 10%. To give you an example, a consumer can get a 4% APR rating on a consumer loan to buy a house. To get an investment, you're looking at a 10% because investors are concerned they might not get their money back. And one of the real dangers is, let's say all the tenants have withheld paying the landlord because they all feel that the landlord's being greedy and don't want to pay him. Okay, landlord is losing the property now. So now here comes the responsibility. Let's see. How much does the tenant own of the property versus the landlord? Let's see. Okay, the bank comes in because nothing was being paid to the bank, so the bank steps in and takes over the property, evicts the tenants because they didn't make an agreement with the bank, so now they're out on the streets. So tenants, what responsibility do you have to that unit now that you are out on the streets? How much of this property do you need to pay the bank because the landlord couldn't pay it back? Nothing, right? You move on. You go on to the next property. You go sign leases somewhere else and move in somewhere else with a more responsible landlord. What else do you owe there? Nothing. What about the landlord? The landlord that had his name tied to the property. The landlord has to go to bankruptcy court to deal with all the creditors that were associated with that property, including the bank. And because the property was to the name of the landlord, the government will issue a garnishment on this landlord's wages. It doesn't matter that he went to bankruptcy court. The IRS wants their money. So this person, once they get a 9-to-5 job because their livelihood is destroyed and they have to go this way, or if they have other assets, the government will then come and take all those assets, and the bank will then come and also take all those assets away. Because if they can't take the assets, they'll have to settle with whatever they can, but they've ruined the landlord's credit for the 10 years. So the question becomes, do either one of you care about your financial well-being? Because this is a relationship. Landlords, you made a promise as soon as you started operating a business known as being a landlord and property manager. Tenants, you made a promise in writing that you were going to pay the rent. So what I'm getting at is this is a two-way street. It's a relationship. Landlords, tenants, both of you. If both of you don't come to an understanding in realizing that, yes, the threat of rent control was scary enough for you to double the rent, but has this tenant been an excellent tenant for you? Has this tenant been one that's taking care of your unit? Do you want to risk all that and throw it away because this person can't afford it anymore, and so you're going to evict them because they failed to pay the rent, and you're going to bring someone else in, and you think you vetted them because, hey, they check out, look, their screening process, everything was great. They come in, and you realize that the person they have with them was the one that's a nightmare, and then ends up becoming a big nuisance that ends up destroying your property. That's the risk you're willing to take, and kicking out a very good tenant? More power to you, or that's what you think. But it's a relationship. And from my experience, and I learned from the best, which are my parents, to understand, because that's where we come from, to never forget our own roots, that we were also tenants dealing with this. And now we're dealing with the seriousness of housing affordability crunches. That I learned how to also manage situations like that. To have an opportunity when I was picking up the rent and my tenant tells me, look, oh, hey man, I'm a plumber, so there was a little bit of a plumbing issue that happened earlier this month. I took care of it, just thought I'd let you know. I'm like, oh snap, man, thanks for that. And then later on, somewhere down the line during his tenancy, he's still my tenant, by the way, at the tenancy, he had a late, he was going to have a late fee because he paid his rent late. And I told the office, we're not going to charge that. No, don't worry about it. He's good. And I told him, hey, your rent was a little late, but don't worry about it. I took care of that. And I told him, look, if there's ever another plumbing issue, by all means, if you want to repair it, I want you to document it when you repair it, before and after pictures, and then send me an invoice so I can compensate you for the work that you took care of. Yeah, that's a relationship. I'm sure that as soon as his family becomes big enough that they're going to outgrow the unit, he's going to move somewhere else. And I hope it's to his own place that he can call home as a homeowner, because there's an ideology that now is being taught that says that being a homeowner is just being one of the greedy fat cats. I don't know where all that stuff came from, but I can tell you is that 70% of people still believe that owning a home is the American dream, and I hope you are one of those that are listening to my voice right now that understand that, because as soon as you get to that point, then you're going to understand a heck of a lot more as to how the everything is rigged against you. Because I will still be covering this issue and other things that are coming on the pipeline, because the assault on landlords isn't going away. That's why landlords are fleeing the state. Yes, they are. And there's a lot of people that are priced out of the state because of the taxes and all that are leaving the state altogether and going to buy properties outside of the state. And when they arrive, they're starting to see like, oh my goodness, $38,000 can get me a house? Oh, of course I'm going to go get a house out there. That's why they're moving out of here and settling up shop out there. But now the problem is that because they have the money, is the same situation that I explained earlier in this episode as to how some of the X factors that contributed to the housing affordability crisis here in California. You have foreign money buying a property in cash. Now you have people that do have the ability to buy cash out of the state. Here, they can't buy them in cash here, but they can buy them outside of the state in cash. So now it's the same situation at a more micro level than a macro level, and they're taking the housing affordability issues to the heartland of America. I covered that in my episode covering the February News Roundup. It's happening across the country, which is why there's Democrat candidates proposing, if they get elected as president, a nationwide rent cap. And I already went through how that doesn't work at a micro level and why it's proven it will not work at a macro level. Oh, throw more money at it. What? Taxing things is the solution to everybody? No one's ever taxed themselves into prosperity. All this is just a government takeover of private property. And once they do, you lose your rights as an individual. You don't trust the government for everything. You don't want them listening into your conversations. You don't want Google and Facebook to be peeking over your whatever photos or text you're exchanging with loved ones or secret lovers or whatever it is. And you're concerned about that, but you don't mind the government doing it for you. It's like, wait, what? NSA's doing what now? It's like, yeah, they're spying on you, and that's your concern. So my point being that if the government is so corrupt, so immoral, so hell-bent on just pocketing the pockets of the politicians, why do you want to give them more power? Why do you want to give them everything of you in the name of sticking it to the landlord? Nobody benefits from this. As I told you, landlord loses the property, you end up on the street. And as you're ending up on the street with you and your family out there in the cold, are you going to say, yeah, we showed that landlord? And landlords, I say to you, is it really worth it for you to risk ruining the business for everybody just because you want that increase in rent, like an egregious increase in rent. It's like you mismanage your own property. You were not attuned to the times. You were misinformed or you didn't care. That is on you. If you can't afford it, sell the property, pass it on to somebody else, reinvest your funds somewhere else. Don't destroy someone's livelihood because you screwed up your own property. Because then you get them to go complain to the legislator that then punishes every single landlord and affects you and everybody you know. Congratulations! You still didn't get your rent increase. How do you feel about that? We got to roll back rent because of this. Well, rollback rent. The law, the statewide rent cap went into effect January 1st, 2020, with a rollback all the way to March 15th, 2019. How do you feel about that? Congratulations. So, of course, the bad apples are ruining the conversations for everybody. And that's why I get passionate about this, because we have this problem where we're separated by ideologies and we're told we're of a different class. No, last I checked, we're all Californians. And I hope that as Californians, we can come together for proper solutions. Which leads me to the last question I wanted to answer. What can we do? I've already told you. We have to leave our stigmas, our dogmas at the door to be able to come with a clear-minded and emotions in check to have a conversation about certain things. Our reality is this: rent will go up no matter what. The question is, how high is it going to go now? And what can we do about the implementation of said things that are not going to force more people onto the streets? And as I've said in a previous episode, again, links that I'm leaving to in the show notes accompanying this episode, that the only solution to it is to build more private houses. The market will correct it. That is what I point to. Capitalism isn't destroying it. Capitalism is the thing that will save it, if you even want to call it that. I even hate calling it capitalism because what Marxists like to term. That is not what it was. The free market is what levels things out. So if you have more houses out there, you'll have more people being able to buy said houses at better prices than now. And best of all, you'll have newer homes that are up to date, up to green code standards. More efficient. Isn't that what we want? That's the best thing that we can do. And we need lesser EPA regulations, speaking of green, because that's what's ruining construction. Everything becomes more expensive because construction. Look, Los Angeles passed a measure, I forget what the name of the measure was, 3 years ago, to have low-income housing and homeless and housing for homeless built. Well, it took 3 years to finally get it done. The Los Angelinos approved the budget. And the city said to the contractors, go ahead. And then it was the city that delayed it for 3 years. How did that help those homeless? Just because you had a good intention doesn't mean it saved anybody. Good intentions pave the road to hell. Let the free market handle it, because the government has proven over and over again that they don't know what the hell they're doing. So what you can do, state legislator, rezone. We need to rezone. And we need less EPA regulations here. You need to let people build. One of the last things I will touch on as to one of the X factors that have also contributed is that there's this ideology that I've mentioned, that just stigma that buying a house is not an investment, and don't buy a house because reasons. That's why you have high earners not buying property. It's the high earners that are living in these luxury apartments and condos that are being erected everywhere. They're the ones that want it. Look at how much demand there is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building all that much. So now you have what I mentioned, gentrification. These people want this kind of thing and don't want you to buy your own property because they think you're damaging the environment because of it. So they're telling you how to live. In the meanwhile, they're living up their life the way they want it. Yeah, that is a problem. That we have high earners not wanting to budge and are contributing to the demand of more expensive housing for rent. Not for buying, because they don't care for buying, apparently. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. So, tenant, what can you do to alleviate things for yourself? Well, for one, I mentioned, not all landlords agree. So don't think of them as much. And if you do have a greedy landlord, by all means, get out of there. And if you really want to stick it to the landlord, you really want to give it to them, if you have the means and ability to buy a property. and then say, who's laughing now? And you'll buy yourself security with that you don't have to be living in fear year to year. Will I be able to afford the rent this time? Will I be kicked out? Or can they kick me out for whatever they want, because sometimes they can? But now there's no fault evictions, so maybe that will help me. No, but there's a way around it too. So what then is your avenue? If you can, buy a property. Some of these rents are more expensive than mortgages themselves. And guess who can help consult you in that? Yours truly. Yes, I'm here at your service. So you want to reach me regarding anything regarding real estate, you can go to www.segoviares.com. Anything about real estate resources is available there, and you want to reach me for a free consultation, you are free to do so. Landlords, I already told you, this is a business, a two-way street. 80% of your business comes from 20% of your clientele. Happy tenants will not destroy your property because the place they call home. And they will give you less headaches. And you won't have a nightmare situation to deal with. So you got to be better at managing your property. Or else we'll have more of this crazy nonsense. So keep your ear to the ground. Listen to my show. Like, share, subscribe to this podcast so you stay in the know. And also responsible. And there's also some landlord conferences coming up. So you want to stay tuned, because you're going to want to go to these things to get versed up on how to better deal with your tenants, especially dealing with equal opportunity rules, because I know there's still some people that are screwing that up. I thought we were past all this. And government, get off my back. This is the longest podcast I've ever done, and I do appreciate that you listened to this far. And even if you don't agree with everything that I said or nothing at all, I appreciate that you even got this far to even listen to the entirety of this. And I know there's some of you that are sitting there, it's like, yeah, Andres, you're talking about probably mom and pop shop for landlords. You're not talking about the greedy commercial conglomerate property management companies that answer to shareholders. And those companies have the ability to circumvent a lot of what's damaging them. And if you can limit their ability to to improve their bottom line here in California, well, guess what? They have the means to be able to liquidate their assets and move out of the state. And some of them already have. I actually covered this in my previous episodes doing some news roundups. Some of them, including smaller sized property management firms that manage about 40 to 50 units in California, that's not even that big. They have the ability to liquidate the assets and take their services elsewhere. And they already have. They've been looking outside of California, where they don't have to put up with so much restrictions as there are here. That's what I mean about landlords also leaving. I also mean commercial property management companies. They've already left because they can. But those that are still here, that are having to deal with all this, they do not have the luxury to pack up and go. They call California home as well, and they depend on this for their livelihood. And if that's taken away from them too, everyone's still going to suffer, as I had mentioned earlier. And I know this is the longest podcast I've ever done, but I haven't even covered everything, and I can't cover everything. But I hope I've given you much more insight as to why this issue is so much more complex than simple class warfare, as the media and the politicians try to make this to be. Even the activists on either side, because it's not. As I mentioned, we all have to come together as Californians to address this. Because this issue will not go away if we don't appropriate things correctly. So I will continue covering this subject because this is an election year, so there are more rules and regulations trying to be proposed on the ballot. So like that's what's curious. Like, okay, so the state already established a statewide rent cap. How much more and what more are they doing? That's exactly what I'm getting at. What are they doing to try to propose to address this when they continuously just try to strengthen current rules that haven't worked? So where would that lead us down? And like everybody else, I'm trying to save California, yo. This is the place that I call home. This is the place where I do business, and I don't see this going anywhere. But if we hurt the economy, then what we miss out is on housing itself being strong, being the only buffer, the only protection towards a recession. And if we destroy the housing economy, especially here in California, because it's basically its own country, its own economy, then when a recession does hit and housing is already in ruins, there will be no safety net when it occurs. And everyone of every social class identification is going to suffer. It doesn't matter how much you make. It doesn't matter how little you make. You will suffer economically in the downturn. So anyway, continue to listen to my podcast to stay in the know. As I have mentioned, go to any of my resources. I gave you both websites already, www.theandresegovia.com for the show and www.segoviares.com for the real estate resources. And in there, you'll be able to find links for all my social media links. And for those that want to communicate to me on the business side, that's what Segovia RES is for. So you can reach me through there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the program. I truly, truly appreciate you for listening this far. And I'll see you on the next one.